Estoppel certificates protect the buyer and the seller too. Let's first talk about what is an estoppel certificate. Basically, it's a document that the tenant signs to state what the current status of the lease is. By a buyer reviewing the leases to determine the property's income, it can't tell the current status. It can't tell what the current rent is, how much the triple nets are, whether the tenant is in default, etc. So the buyer requests the seller to obtain from the property's tenants a statement to confirm the critical information regarding the lease, such as one, attaching a copy of the lease to the estoppel certificate. Now, when did the term of the lease start? When does it end? Does the tenant have any remaining unexercised extension option? How much is the current rent? How much in operating expenses is the tenant paying? These are all very important facts that the buyer wants to confirm before it closes escrow. By getting the information directly from the tenant, then the buyer can rely on that information. Tenant cannot, after the close of escrow, change its word and say, no, the facts are different than what I stated in the estoppel certificate. Estoppel certificates are used by buyers and also lenders to verify the cash flow and these other related issues. Sometimes sellers resist getting the estoppel certificate very simply because it's difficult, time-consuming, and cumbersome. You have to deal with tenants, and if you have many tenants, it's a lot of work. Sometimes requesting a tenant to sign an estoppel certificate alerts the tenant to a pending sale or refinancing, and at that point, the tenant will see an opportunity to get landlord to fix something or ask for some new concession. Most commercial leases require tenants to sign a estoppel certificate. If they don't, they're in default under the lease. So it's a good idea for sellers who are going to sell a property to deal with tenants before marketing it to resolve any issues. As an alternative for a seller to get estoppel, the seller can provide a certified rent roll, which is often used in apartment deals, especially an apartment building with a lot of tenants, because it's very cumbersome to go to all the tenants in a large apartment building. If the buyer relies on the rent roll and closes escrow and the rent roll was incorrect, the buyer's recourse is to sue the seller for breach of contract or fraud or etc. It's much better from a buyer's perspective to get the status of the lease directly from the horse's mouth, meaning the tenant, to make sure that it's accurate information. Another alternative is for the seller to provide an estoppel certificate. Usually that's done when a seller can't get an estoppel certificate from a minimum number of tenants or certain specified tenants. A seller signed estoppel certificate doesn't bind the tenant. So if it turns out that the seller's estoppel certificate was incorrect, then the buyer has to sue the seller based on the seller's misrepresentation, which really is not good for either the buyer or the seller. Sellers typically want to avoid giving an estoppel to avoid the liability that comes with giving that estoppel certificates. So obtaining the tenant estoppel certificate from the tenants protects both the buyer and the seller.